Welcome to True Echo, where real courage echoes through forgotten stories. Today's gripping tale dives into the raw reality of power, prejudice, and redemption. When a black man, dismissed as irrelevant by an arrogant officer, uttered 5 calm words, the entire SWAT team froze. What they didn't know was that the man they mocked was once the system's most elite. This is the story of Marcus Reed, the man who forced America to listen, not with rage but with truth. The laughter wasn't new. It had followed Marcus Reed through most of his life, echoing in boardrooms, lobbies, and back alleys. But this time it came from armed men in uniform, tactical gear shining under the Los Angeles sun, weapons slung with pride, confidence worn like armor. "Hey old man," one sneered. "This isn't a charity line." Marcus said nothing. He didn't flinch. His posture was steel, molded from years of war, hardened by survival. His eyes, locked on the building ahead, saw what they didn't: shadows behind curtains, reflections on glass that hinted at a disaster waiting to unfold. Lieutenant Brian Carter was the loudest of them. His brand new vest gleamed, untouched by sweat or grime. He had the look of someone who'd memorized protocols, but never had to bleed through a plan that didn't go by the book. "You're not allowed here," Carter barked, his hand on the grip of his holstered Glock. "Move." Marcus turned slowly. "I live on the second floor. Apartment 204. The others burst into laughter. Carter smirked. "Yeah. And I'm Batman." No one checked his ID. No one asked his name. Because in their eyes, Marcus was just another worn-out black man, another misplaced piece in the puzzle of a city trying to gentrify its pain. But what they didn't know was that Marcus had smelled the chemicals weeks ago. That he had warned the building staff. That he had seen the man in the hoodie, Simon Brooks, entering at odd hours, carrying gear only ex-military would recognize. And that now, standing before a bomb-ready apartment, it was Marcus who had all the answers, and no one who cared to ask the questions. Marcus had seen this before. In Caracas, in Beirut, in places where wars wore no uniforms. The setup was always the same: arrogance at the front, silence in the rear, and a trap set for anyone foolish enough to believe they were in control. Inside apartment 402 something waited. Not just a man with a gun, but a message. A scream buried beneath floorboards, wired to explode unless heard. Captain Cole Matthews was folding blueprints on the hood of a SWAT SUV, sweat dripping down his neck. 3 hours of no response from inside. Negotiators were at a standstill. The plan? Breach from the rooftop. Standard procedure. But Marcus knew better. That breach point was a death trap. He took a step closer toward the perimeter, not out of courage, but necessity. If they breach from the rooftop, Marcus whispered to himself, they'll all die. A younger officer shoved him to the ground. "Crazy old man." Captain Matthews turned sharply. "Who let him pass the line?" Marcus's breath didn't falter. He looked up, calm, composed. "He's rigged a pressure mine above the roof entrance. I saw the trigger laser reflecting from the east window. You breach and they die." The SWAT team froze. Matthews narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" Marcus stood, dusted off his coat. His next words dropped like stones in water. "Marcus Reed, Commander. Operation Tempest, Delta Force." A hush fell over the scene. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Matthews stared. "Tempest," he whispered. Lieutenant Carter scoffed. "That op is sealed. Classified." Marcus reached into his jacket. Pulled out an ID, faded, frayed, but real. The kind with a seal no civilian could replicate. Matthews blinked twice. Then ordered, "Run the ID." Less than a minute later, Carter's phone lit up. His face drained of color. Code confirmation: Marcus Reed. Delta Force. Tempest Command. Tactical clearance level 7. Marcus looked Carter dead in the eye. "You wanted to know who I am? I'm the man who taught Simon Brooks how to survive. And now I'm here to stop him before your arrogance gets us all killed." The silence was thicker than body armor. Lieutenant Carter, just moments ago filled with bravado, stood paralyzed. Every tactical officer nearby was glued to Marcus. Not because he was shouting, not because he had drawn a weapon, but because the man they had dismissed as irrelevant now stood with the weight of authority none of them could match. Captain Matthews stepped closer. "You said you trained Simon Brooks?" Marcus nodded once. "He was my best. Until the system broke him." Matthews glanced at the tactical map, then the east-facing window Marcus had mentioned. The light, barely visible unless you knew what to look for, blinked red. A laser tripwire. Motion triggered. Heat resistant. Military grade. Marcus turned toward Carter, whose lips trembled between disbelief and ego. You put your hand on your weapon because I looked like I didn't belong. You see that window? That's where your funeral would have started. Carter opened his mouth but nothing came out. And then Marcus said the 5 words that made the entire SWAT team freeze mid-step. Black lamb. Abort. Immediate. Explosives. Time stopped. The words weren't just a warning, they were a military code. A national emergency phrase used by only the highest-level Delta Force operatives. It meant imminent threat of chemical or explosive devices, level 7 and above. Only 23 people in the country had clearance to issue it, and Marcus Reed was one of them. Captain Matthews' hand flew to his radio. Confirm Black Lamb code. MR019 Delta Alpha. Seconds ticked by. Then a female voice came through the comms. Code confirmation, valid. Marcus Reed. Clearance authorized. Delta Command. Everyone turned toward Marcus. The disbelief that had once stained their eyes was gone. What remained was awe, and the realization that the man they mocked had just saved their lives. Lieutenant Carter stood pale. Mouth open. Hands loose. Stripped of power not by force, but by truth. Back in the command center, Lieutenant Rachel Cruz approached Marcus. Her voice was calm, steady. Commander, I'm ready to assist. Marcus glanced at her, recognition flickering in his eyes. You trained at Langley. Bravo class correct. Cruz blinked in surprise. Yes. How did you? I reviewed your file. You were top in negotiation. That's what I need now. Matthews gestured for Cruz to take over as tactical liaison. Marcus continued. Simon's not trying to kill anyone. Not yet. He wants to be heard. But if we don't give him that chance soon, this building will become his obituary. Cruz looked toward apartment 402, then back at Marcus. You know his mind? I don't know where he is mentally now, Marcus admitted. But I know where he started. And I know the route he took to get here. Matthews tapped his fingers on the blueprint. Then we need you inside. Marcus looked up. His face was unreadable. No weapons. No radio. No escort. I go in alone. Cruz's eyes widened. Sir, that's non-negotiable, Marcus interrupted. If he sees a wire in my ear, he'll trigger everything. Matthews nodded reluctantly. 15 minutes. If we don't hear from you, then assume we failed, Marcus said bluntly. But I don't intend to. He turned to the gear station. An officer handed him a vest. Marcus slipped it on with the calmness of a man brushing off a memory. Cruz stepped closer. We'll be waiting. Marcus gave her a look, half gratitude, half farewell, then walked toward the building alone. No ceremony. No backup. Just one man. Walking into the mouth of a storm he helped create 2 decades ago. And behind him, the silence wasn't fear. It was respect. The door to apartment 402 clicked shut behind Marcus Reed with a soft finality, the kind that told you were either going to make it out, or become part of the debris. The room was dim, almost sacred in its silence. Not a battlefield. Not yet. But a memory reborn. 3 hostages sat huddled in the corner, a young girl, a college student, and an elderly woman, all trembling but curiously unharmed. No bruises. No gag. No tape. Just fear and confusion. The kind that comes from being in the presence of something you don't understand. Simon Brooks sat slouched beneath the window, his back to the wall, eyes bloodshot, sweat glistening down his forehead. In his hand, a detonator, small, gray, finger ready. But he didn't flinch when Marcus entered. He looked up slowly. Commander? That word, almost broken, echoed in the room. Simon, Marcus said, his voice steady. You don't have to do this. Simon let out a rasping laugh. You're dead. They told me you died in Latakia. I survived. Barely. But the man I was? Maybe he didn't. Simon pressed the back of his head against the wall and stared at the ceiling. I waited. Years. Asked for you at Fort Bragg. They said your name wasn't in the system. That you'd never existed. I thought, maybe you were a ghost. No, Marcus said. They just buried us differently. Simon held up the detonator, not threateningly, more like a gesture of bitterness. And now they're going to bury me too. But not quietly. Not this time. Marcus took a step forward. Simon's hand twitched, but the detonator didn't activate. A sign of hesitation. A flicker of trust. I trained you, Marcus said. I gave you tools to survive combat. But I failed to teach you how to survive when the war ended. Simon's eyes welled. The war never ended. It just followed me home. And everyone acted like I brought it with me on purpose. Marcus knelt slowly, bringing himself to eye level. You're not wrong for being in pain, Simon. But this will not heal you. Simon looked at the hostages. I didn't hurt them. I never meant to. I just needed the world to hear me. And the only way to make them listen is with fear, Marcus finished. But that's not your legacy. They were both quiet now. Like two veterans sharing breath in a foxhole that smelled of gun oil and betrayal. Simon whispered, So what am I supposed to do? Just surrender? Let them call me a terrorist? No, Marcus said. You still have one thing left. The choice of how this ends. Simon looked at the detonator. His hand trembled. I don't know if I can let go. Marcus slowly reached into his jacket and pulled out a small silver device, an Omega jammer. A last resort tool designed to disable all RF transmissions within 10 meters. You won't have to, Marcus said softly. He pressed the button. A red light flickered. The detonator went dead. Simon blinked. You came prepared. No, Marcus replied. I came determined. Then, in one motion smoother than breath, Marcus swept Simon's arm, twisted his wrist, and brought the man to the ground using a Delta-trained Viper lock, precise, controlled, and fast. 3 more triggers, Simon gasped. Bathroom vent, ceiling, and the hallway wall. Marcus didn't even nod. He had already seen it. He reached into the folds of the ceiling, pulling out a secondary trigger. Then another behind the bathroom mirror. And finally, in the vent behind the wall, a sensor-triggered device lined with copper and aluminum foil, rigged to blast in a cone. He disabled each one in silence. Outside in the command center, Cruz's headset lit up. All RF signals in apartment 402 have ceased. Motion sensors offline. Possible disarmament confirmed. Lieutenant Carter, still brooding in the background, frowned. This doesn't mean anything. Could be a trick. But Matthew shook his head. No. It means the man we underestimated just saved us all. Back inside the apartment, Marcus finally looked at Simon. The man lay there, face down, sobbing quietly. I don't want to be remembered as a villain, Simon whispered. Then stand up, Marcus said. And walk out with me. Simon looked at him, eyes hollow. And after that? You'll get help. Real help. I'll see to it myself. And somehow, in that dusty room of pain, rage, and silence, a miracle happened. Simon let go. Marcus took his hand, cuffed it gently, and turned to the hostages. You're safe now. They didn't cheer. They didn't move at first. But the little girl stepped forward. Who are you? She asked softly. Marcus looked at her, then at Simon, then at the window bathed in the softest light of dusk. Someone who once forgot how to listen, but remembered just in time. He opened the door. And the man who had entered as a ghost now walked out as the only one who knew the way back. As Marcus Reed stepped out of apartment 402, the hallway bathed in shadows fell into a stunned silence. He emerged without a weapon, without backup, but with 3 hostages safely in tow, and behind him Simon Brooks, hands cuffed, head bowed, no longer the threat the city had feared, but a man disarmed not by force, but by being heard. No one spoke. Not the SWAT team standing frozen outside the stairwell. Not the tech crew manning the surveillance feeds. Not even Captain Matthews. The only sound was the gentle creak of Marcus's boots on the old tile floor, each step carrying the weight of 2 decades of silence. The moment they exited the building, the world seemed to hold its breath. No applause. No sirens. Just stillness. As if everyone present understood they had just witnessed something that didn't belong in training manuals or after-action reports. Lieutenant Carter stood among the crowd of stunned officers, his face pale, lips pressed tight. He had been the one to pin Marcus to the asphalt just hours before. Now he couldn't even meet his eyes. Captain Matthews approached, his steps measured, gaze locked on Marcus. He took the detonator from Marcus's hand. Then softly he asked, How? Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked back at the building, then at Simon, now being gently escorted by Cruz and a medic. You stopped seeing him as a soldier, Marcus said. But he never stopped being one. Just one you forgot. Matthews looked down. And you? Where did you go, Marcus? Marcus glanced at the tactical team still frozen like statues. Nowhere. I just stayed quiet long enough for the system to forget me too. The next morning the world knew his name. Marcus Reed. The man in a faded khaki coat who brought a hostage situation to an end with no bullets fired. Only 5 words and a stare that cut through steel. Social media exploded with 3 videos. The first showed Carter mocking and arresting Marcus at the barricade. The second, the SWAT team standing still, weapons lowered as Marcus emerged with the hostages. And the third, perhaps the most powerful, showed Marcus gently placing his hand on the young girl's shoulder, leading her out of the building, Simon cuffed but unharmed behind him. Comment sections flooded. He's not just a hero, he's the example they've all ignored. That man didn't just save lives, he saved what leadership is supposed to be. 5 words shut down an entire SWAT team. 5 words. At the LAPD headquarters, Lieutenant Brian Carter sat in front of a review board, hands clenched in his lap. Across the table, HR and legal counsel reviewed internal footage and transcripts. A photo was placed in front of him. Carter holding Marcus down. 3 other officers laughing in the background. Abuse of power. Racially motivated language. Operational negligence. Disregard of threat assessment protocol. A woman from HR read flatly. Effective immediately, your command privileges are revoked. Suspension with pay. Reassignment pending review. Carter didn't argue. He couldn't. Because for the first time he realized the authority he had once wielded like a weapon had never truly belonged to him. Elsewhere, Marcus Reed sat on a wooden bench outside a small brick community center on LA's east side. No cameras. No interviews. Just an old flip phone buzzing with messages. Most were from veterans. Others, from people in power who now remembered his name. One message stood out. NSA Director. We need to talk. Not just about Simon Brooks, but about people like you. A week later, Marcus sat at a long table in Washington, D.C., across from representatives of the NSA, Department of Defense and Veterans Affairs. No press. No fanfare. Just 3 men and 1 mission. The Silver Ridge incident exposed something deeper, said the NSA director. A failure to monitor the mental health and reintegration of former operatives. Especially the ones the system never wanted to admit existed. Marcus nodded once. You want my help, he said. We need your help, the man from the Pentagon corrected. To prevent the next Simon Brooks. Marcus leaned forward. Then I'll give it. On one condition. The room fell still. I want a real program. Not a pilot. Not a secret. I want resources. Oversight. Independence. And most of all, I want it named properly. The VA rep raised a brow. What do you want to call it? Marcus looked out the window. His voice calm. Tempest. They all fell silent. Because they knew what that name meant, and what it cost to carry it. 3 months later, an old military warehouse in downtown D.C. was refurbished. No fanfare. No red carpet. Just a simple sign. Tempest Veterans Recovery and Reintegration Initiative. Director, Marcus Reed. No cameras came. Only those who truly needed it. And Marcus? He returned every day. Not for medals. Not for redemption. But to make sure no one else was forgotten in the silence. In the heart of Washington, D.C., hidden behind a nondescript gray building that once housed Cold War logistics files, the Tempest Initiative had begun to stir. The world had nearly forgotten Marcus Reed, until he stepped out of the smoke of Silver Ridge. Now he was rebuilding not his reputation but a system that had failed thousands like him. Inside the newly built facility, maps lined the walls, not of countries but of neighborhoods. Places where veterans had gone dark. Places where silence wasn't peace but post-combat exile. Marcus's office was spare. A desk, a stack of manila folders, a worn-out file cabinet filled with declassified missions that had no official name. Files once marked destroy after reading, were now being reconstructed page by Marcus himself. There were no lieutenants, no chain of command. Just names. Aaron White, former recon sniper in Kabul, now living in a shelter in Tucson. Devin Chase, once a bomb technician now isolated in Alaska, suffering from undiagnosed schizophrenia. Emilia Torres, cyber-intel analyst, discharged after panic episodes, now working as a night janitor in Atlanta. Each one represented a thread Marcus refused to let fray. Because each one could become the next Simon Brooks. Each one had been trained to survive war but not to survive coming home. One afternoon, Lieutenant Rachel Cruz visited Tempest. She had been the first to believe in Marcus during the crisis. Now she was seeing what that belief had built. This place, she said, walking the quiet hallways lined with cork boards and field reports, it doesn't feel like an institution. It's not, Marcus replied. It's a lifeline. They stood in front of an old steel door at the end of the hallway. It had no nameplate, only a quote engraved into a brass plaque. Respect does not come from rank. It comes from action. Rachel touched the metal gently. That's what you told Carter. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. A week later, the LAPD launched a new mandatory officer development course for all mid and senior ranking personnel. The name? WRID Protocol. Wisdom. Respect. Integrity. Tactics. Empathy. The training didn't begin with standard case studies or active shooter simulations. It began with a clip. Marcus Reed walking out of the smoke at Silver Ridge, hand resting on the shoulder of a rescued child, with Simon Brooks cuffed behind him, head down but alive. No lecture. No intro music. Just that clip. Then came Marcus stepping into the room. He said nothing about the mission. Nothing about Black Lamb. He didn't need to. He started the session with a whiteboard and a question. If you walk into a room that smells like bleach, what do you ask first? One officer replied, was someone just cleaning? Another said, is someone hiding a crime? Marcus nodded. Both answers are valid. But the real issue is whether you even noticed the smell. He paused. Lesson 1. Question your own assumptions. They'll kill more people than bullets ever will. In the back of the room, a man sat quietly. No name tag. No uniform. Just a gray shirt and a hard stare. It was Brian Carter. Demoted. Stripped of rank. Assigned to clerical duty in a rural precinct. But today he had chosen to attend this session voluntarily. Marcus didn't acknowledge him at first. But when the room cleared, Carter stayed. Finally he spoke. I want to start over, he said quietly. I don't expect forgiveness. I want to learn. Marcus looked at him, not with triumph but with something rarer. Understanding. You won't find what you're looking for in protocols, Marcus said. You'll find it in people you dismissed too quickly. Carter nodded slowly. Then I'll be here. As long as it takes. No handshake followed. No applause. Just a quiet moment where a man once drunk on authority now sat, stripped of everything but humility. The next day, a new stone marker was placed outside the WRIT training facility. It bore no name. Only words. Respect is not a rank. It is earned. One decision at a time. And every officer who walked past it read those words like a silent oath. The sun hung low over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the city that had once tried to erase Marcus Reed. Now it whispered his name in quiet reverence, not out of celebration but out of respect. Not because of medals or rank or a viral video, but because in a single afternoon he had forced the system to listen. Not with volume, but with truth. Inside Tempest, the daily rhythm continued. Files opened. Names reviewed. Old scars studied not to reopen them, but to understand them. Marcus had become something the country rarely produced. A silent leader whose very presence redefined what leadership meant. One morning, a young officer from Chicago flew in to join the WRIT program. He was barely 25. Eager. Disciplined. But something about him reminded Marcus of someone, maybe Carter, maybe himself. After the first lecture, the officer chased him down in the parking lot. Mr. Reed? Marcus turned. I wanted to ask you something. Do you ever regret staying silent all those years? Marcus paused. His hand rested on the old duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked past the officer toward the skyline of a city still rebuilding from within. If I had spoken earlier, Marcus said, maybe I'd have been remembered as a hero. He looked the young man in the eye. But because I stayed silent when I finally spoke, the whole system had to stop and listen. The young man nodded slowly, unsure whether to thank him or just absorb what had been said. Marcus turned and walked away, not quickly, not triumphantly. Just as a man who understood that real power doesn't come from the loudest voice in the room. It comes from being the one voice no one can ignore when it matters most. Back in Washington, the Tempest Initiative had become a quiet revolution. Not a newsworthy one, but one measured in lives salvaged and names unburied. Simon Brooks, the former hostage-taker, was no longer behind bars. After a psychological evaluation and the reinstatement of his erased military record, he had become the first patient enrolled in the Tempest Recovery Program. He now spent his days in a therapeutic housing facility under the guidance of trauma experts. No shackles. No criminal status. Just a veteran rediscovering what it meant to exist in a world he once believed had no space left for him. When Marcus visited the facility weeks later, Simon didn't speak. He simply stood, straightened, and gave a sharp, crisp military salute, the kind that only one man had ever trained him to give. Marcus didn't return the gesture. He didn't have to. Saving one man, he said, doesn't erase the mistakes that came before. But it prevents the next mistake. As for Lieutenant Brian Carter, he no longer wore a badge. After his disciplinary hearing, he was reassigned to a records branch in Timber Ridge, Montana. A small town. A forgotten outpost. But even there he studied. He read every report Marcus had authored. He sat in virtual WRID sessions. And one day he submitted a formal request to transfer into the Tempest teaching program as a civilian assistant. Not as a soldier. Not as a leader. Just as a man trying to unlearn what the system had once taught him. His application was marked under review. But Marcus had already placed it at the top of the pile. Because redemption wasn't just for the fallen. It was for those who knew they had fallen and wanted to climb back. 6 months after the Silver Ridge incident, the first advanced observation seminar was held in a modest facility on the outskirts of Baltimore. Officers from 17 departments across the U.S. were in attendance. The speaker? Marcus Reed. He didn't begin with a PowerPoint or a tactical case study. He started with a blank screen. And one question. If someone shows up where they don't belong, do you reach for your weapon or ask why they're there? No one answered immediately. But every officer in that room remembered the story. The man they had once seen as a nobody. The man who had uttered just 5 words. Black lamb. Abort. Immediate. Explosives. And made the entire SWAT team freeze. This was the story of Marcus Reed, a black man silenced by the very system he once protected, until he stood up not with fury, but with discipline, memory, and 5 words that saved lives and shook a nation's conscience. In a world obsessed with noise, Marcus reminded us, true power doesn't scream. It resonates. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes that respect comes with titles. Let them see what real respect looks like. Leave a comment below. Would you have had the courage to listen to Marcus that day? Subscribe to True Echo, where we don't just tell stories. We echo truth.